All right. Welcome, everyone, to this new episode of The Single Source, the product data podcast by PIMVendors.com. I'm Stefan Spijkers. I'm the co founder of PIMVendors.com, and I'm joined here today by Chris Jobse, my co founder, and Helen Grimster of Syndigo, where she is responsible for product marketing. They'll get the chance to introduce themselves in a short while, as I want to quickly place the topic at hand. We're going to discuss B2B commerce and specifically the move that we see in the market where, well, basically the ERP, the enterprise resource planning software, the traditional place maybe where you were managing that product data in that B2B environment is no longer cutting it. And what we are seeing with our customers, with the prospects and leads that are coming in, is that they are struggling to manage all that product complexity and all the product demands that their customers place on the organization in the ERP tooling, which, can we be frank, was never built to be a product data hub anyway. It is focused around transactions. Of course, PIM will help alleviate that, and we're going to discuss that in detail. But let's make a quick round of introductions through our speakers, and maybe first also start discussing some interesting PIM news. But we'll get to that. Maybe, Chris, could you do a quick intro, and then
Yep.
Helen?
Fine. Well, I'm together with Stefan. We founded PIM Vendors 6 years ago, working solely in the product information sphere, and I'm doing this for more than 25 years, seeing quite a lot of PIM solutions coming and going. Because there's also some consolidation going on, so we talk about this later maybe. And still, what I see now also in the market is the shift from retail to wholesale, because they have to catch up. That's so I've seen quite a lot of retailers, but also wholesalers in my career, and so I'm happy to talk about this today.
All right, Helen?
Yeah, hi, I'm Helen. I'm currently at Syndigo, where I'm responsible for product marketing. Prior to that, I've worked as an analyst at Gartner, covering, of course, MDM, but mostly PIM. So it's my happiest place. Before I was at Gartner, I worked for a number of different PIM and MDM vendors. So I've been around in the space probably as long as Chris, but I don't actually want to admit to it. So from my point of view, it's really interesting to see that pivot from people thinking PIM is just for retail, really understanding that to be successful in B2B, you also need great product data to make sure that you are giving that information to the people that need it, whether that's your customers or suppliers, or distributing that out through other areas that perhaps when you're in B2B, it didn't matter so much. So it's been really interesting over the last few years how things have changed. But we'll get into that. Sorry, I could start talking straight away. But back to you,
Yeah, yeah.
Stefan.
It, 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 I mean, the market is evolving, right? And I think we see that sort of from a customer's perspective where the demands are changing. I think we also seeing that from a vendor and supplier perspective where, well, I think we have always known that a market where there's 260 plus PIM solutions competing for the same group of customers is just not sustainable, right? And that we should see some movement in the market. And of course, it has never been a quiet market. There's big investments, or there have been big investments in different toolings. Akinio raised a lot of money a few years back, and but on the other hand, we're still seeing upstarts and new entrants, especially with all the vibe coding happening because of AI and Claude Code at the same time. So there's new PIMs being added to our list every week still. With that being said, I'm not sure, Chris, how do you see the developments in the market nowadays?
Yeah, what I said, I think that it's shifting from retail to wholesale. Why? Because uh, the market, also in the wholesale world, there are people behind this. They're used to search their product on Amazon, and they're used to for giving their products also to a multi-channel environment. And they have configurable products, etc., etc. So they are used for more complexity in the products, which they cannot find in their ERP at this moment. So you see this shift towards more PIM solutions in the MDM market. And of course, there are a lot of new PIM solutions coming up every year, every month, so to say. And some of them really service a very niche market. That's fine. They will never be the big ones like a Caneo or others. That's not what they're aiming at. They're aiming at being very good in ETIM or very good in GS1 or this kind of solutions. Sometimes they're used on top of the big solutions, because the big solutions, they not always offer this out of the box. So there's always a combination. You always have to look into the architecture. How are you going to use a certain tool? Call it a PIM, call it whatever, CPQ, or there are several solutions in the area which have to be connected to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also say that, the B2B trend really, I think we're gonna go back to saying that it really started to take shape with COVID and the need to be able to bring out your information because you had to change your route to market. So I think we saw that maybe some of the more traditional B2B vendors realized that they needed to sell online and they needed to pivot, but the information that they'd already stored, maybe in their ERP or wherever it wasn't good enough for being in front of a customer. Maybe the customers that they were used to selling to, maybe they were the ones that did the transformation, but that route to market had shifted and they needed to ensure that they had great information. So I think that's also been the rise of maybe newer vendors coming along, shifts from the original vendors that were very much retail focused, B2C PIMs, bringing in B2B offerings and maybe expanding their portfolio. But I would also say that some of the PIM vendors have grown up for B2B. There are definitely vendors out there that are really focusing on those use cases. Some vendors do B2C better than they do B2B, and then other vendors offer both. But as Chris said, it's also not just about the PIM now, it's about how do you then share that information to the channels that need it. So instead of just sending a spreadsheet or whatever it was that you used to do before, people are expecting that to be delivered in certain formats. It's not quite the same as like popping out to Amazon and so on. But again, what we're seeing now is maybe some of what was traditionally B2B now selling through other channels or having to populate different markets. And of course, there are B2B marketplaces that you have to send your content to in a different format. So I think that has changed the whole market, the whole need to be able to do that. And also, I'm going to put it in there, some of the B2B vendors are now D2C as well. So if you look at maybe what used to be a traditional B2B like Nestle or whoever, some of the larger CPGs, they also have their own direct channels. If you think about something like Nespresso or Purina, or if we're looking at Nestle, they then have had to pivot to be able to make sure that the content that perhaps they had previously, which was fine for internal, has to be consumer facing. So the market has definitely evolved, and the need to get your product information out quicker, faster, and in better shape has meant that there's been this pivot away from PIM being seen as a B2C issue to also being a B2B one. So it's
Yeah.
quite an exciting time for PIM. But
Yeah.
again, do we need 260 different vendors? That's another topic entirely.
I mean, yeah, and I think that's also what we're seeing in the market, right? So I know you have a history at Gartner, Helen. So
Yeah.
we did have, for the first time in 5 years, a new report. I think hitting us yesterday, was not just launched. Um, I think one of the most interesting developments is maybe not the sort of new quadrants and the fact that there's some vendors there that were just purchased. We can discuss that as well, but also that we are certainly seeing a magic quadrant for master data management again. And I mean, you already mentioned there is some acquisition activity taking place in the PIM. I'm going to expand it a bit to the product data, master data
Mm.
space, where SAP acquired Reltio,
Yes.
but and that was also, I think, announced this week. But also that we see this flight towards, I would say, a product data foundation,
Yeah.
and that foundation layer, whether that is in PIM or whether that is in MDM, is something that is happening right now. And I thought you were going to mention it. You said D2C as a trend, but there's another trend, AI, happening at this stage, where we see that flight or maybe return to the foundation layer and the foundational product data layer, whether that is in your MDM or in your PIM. And it makes, to me, no sense that we have 260 systems all trying to reinvent the wheel for AI now. And I think this evolution, this revolution with AI is going to shake up the market, maybe even more than the direct to consumer, or maybe even COVID happening 5 years ago, for at least speaking for the PIM and MDM market. So I'm very curious how this is going to turn out.
I think it is really interesting that SAP have made that, I'm going to say, called out the fact that they know that their MDM solution maybe, or MDG, isn't going to move forward into the next iteration, which is obviously why they've purchased a Reltio to maybe cover the non-SAP use cases, maybe far more looking at moving forward. And it makes perfect sense that they are going to do that. Then that means, they're covering MDM. And we know that Hybris is at its, I'm going to say, twilight years. Does that mean that they're going to look at something for PIM as well? That's another topic. But I do think that need for that foundational layer is coming from the need to have better ERP data, which perhaps is why the need to have an MDM tool to really make sure that that's happening. So, traditionally, of course, the ERP was something like SAP, was where product data was born. And we could obviously talk about why that isn't the right place for it. And maybe that's the whole beginning of this discussion, because that the information that you stored in ERP was supposed to be far more internal than external. So I think that really leads into, is that master data that then feeds into a PIM, or how does that all happen now if we're looking from a B2B perspective?
Yeah, but on the other hand, when you are in a B2B environment and you have the demand from the retailers is also much bigger. They want precise and good product data to be able to sell the products to the end customer. So they refer back to the wholesaler saying, please give me this information. Whereas in let's say 5 years ago, they asked it and they didn't get it, so they made it themselves. But now the demand is getting bigger and bigger, so they demand also based on the regulations there are digital product passport, for instance. You have to go back to the root of the product information, and therefore also in the wholesale world there is much more demand for more detailed product data. So that's also the trend what I'm seeing, going from the end customer to the retailer, going back to the wholesaler, going back to the manufacturer. Uh, the information should be initiated there and go through the whole cycle. It's not at its moment, but that's the trend what I'm seeing.
And the need then to take that data as a manufacturer and be able to publish it to a data pool, whether that's GS1 or whether it's through different marketplaces or different actual retailers. So being able to publish out to Kroger, to Carrefour, to all of these different people that have different requirements as well. That was something that used to just be done via spreadsheet. But now, in order to get your products to market as quickly as possible or to meet their requirements, you are going to have to make sure that the information that you're holding in your products fits what they're looking for. And I think that is also another change. It's a different route to market and the need to be much more digital about how you share that information. So that growth of being able to fuel different channels is also making B2B another more important area for PIM.
And I mean, do you also reckon that the sort of data demands have increased as well. I mean, in a CSV or in a spreadsheet, you can put in like flat data, like a title or description or attributes, but you can't link it to other entities or other products when it's a spare part or a combination of a set, or when you're looking at manuals or maybe other regulatory data that is now being required across the value chain. Like that also helps, and I think pushes the whole industry towards using a dedicated solution to manage all that more complicated, more complete, better. I mean, maybe not, but at least more complete product data as well, right? I mean, there is still a DPP related subject topic episode on our list of episodes to record, but that is definitely, regulation is definitely a driver for that drive as well.
And also the complexity of the products, the complexity of the one-off products. Let's say you have to build some product which doesn't exist as such in your ERP, but is constructed out of sub products. You don't have it in your ERP. Otherwise, you will have thousands of products which will never be sold because they are not products as such. So you can construct it within the relations you define in your PIM. Say, okay, this is actually the product, and then you transfer this information to your ERP. So there's all kind of use cases which you cannot do actually in your ERP itself. You have to organize this outside of this. Then what happens is people use a spreadsheet and say, okay, this is the bill of material, and then we import it in the ERP. But it's not sustainable. It's not. You cannot track and trace the information at that point any longer.
Yeah. So I mean, and then a spreadsheet and even a traditional ERP just doesn't cut it anymore, right? Sorry, Helen, you wanted to say something.
No, I was going to actually add on about, the fact that sometimes you need to build a particular bundle or a particular product for a retailer. So maybe they want to do a promotional offer of putting two products together to sell for a season or whatever that is. That's not easy to do in an ERP, to create those entities. And also, how do you create the descriptions if you're going to take it from two records that, as we know, ERP does not store all of the characters that potentially that you need? How do you do that? How do you create a bundle that's specific for that? And as you're saying about spare parts and so on, far more complex. But we're seeing, that retailers want to put things together for their own promotional purposes. That's another use case that is growing all the time. And I think, when we talk about the complexity, we know that there's different variants, there's different formulas, there's different things for different markets, different channels, and so on. And again, the ERP has not really been the place that you can create those variants really quickly and on the fly and be able to make sure that you are delivering the correct information downstream. So yeah, I was just going to add into that.
Selling this to from the ERP perspective, when you have different channels and defining different channels within your ERP, it's quite a hassle. Whereas a PIM actually is built for this. So that's another thing where you can build in your flexibility and your speed for time to market.
And I think we know that back in the day, or ERP records are really built for internal purposes, really. It's the SKU, it's the description, it's the price, inventory, maybe a few technical fields. That was pretty much it. And that was what you, maybe back in the day, you put to your catalogue, or because you normally would have somebody maybe out in the field or a salesperson talking about it. But the product record today has to do so much more. And it does the selling on its own, which is probably why, yes, of course, your ERP will still be the backbone of what you're doing, but it can't deliver everything that it needs to in the new world and the way that people want that information. So we're not saying you're going to get rid of ERP, but you need something to be able to take that information, maybe translate it, maybe take it into a different format that can then service all of these new requirements that you have in the B2B landscape.
And it also demands a lot from your organization at that point, because when you start creating your products in the PIM environment, you cannot on the same time create a product in your ERP, because there will be a conflict. So you have to have clear rules where a product starts, who is in the lead, what's the system of record, and also deal with that within your organization. It's not just a technical issue.
And I mean, okay, so it's clear you can't do everything in a spreadsheet, and it's clear you can't do everything in an ERP. But I think when we look in practice, people still use spreadsheets and use or abuse the ERP for product data management. What kind of signals do you guys see in practice when it comes to when does the pain becomes too high to bear? And when do they start switching to a dedicated PIM or dedicated MDM solution?
I mean, I think you actually said it, when people are trying to pivot and make the ERP do something it wasn't designed for. At the point where they've got, they think they can just extend the ERP to do, create the different channels and so on, be able to create the relationships between the products. An ERP was never built for this. It's, as you said, it's transactional, and to try and it's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. It just will break and overload, and I think it just can't cope, and you need another system to put on top of it. Otherwise you'll end up with it being overloaded, it breaking, you won't get the right information. And I think that's what we see a lot of times, as people say, I don't need anything else, I've got my ERP. But if they then try and take the ERP and then take that out and then take it to spreadsheets, the moment they're taking the data out of an ERP into a spreadsheet, I think that's the flag that there's a problem and that they need to put something else in place. Because, as we've just said, spreadsheets will go to another level, but they won't take you to that point. So I think if somebody says that, oh, I don't need something, I've got macros and I can do it all inside my spreadsheets, that for me is the point that you're saying, no, you need something else. And I appreciate that, spreadsheets can do a lot, but they can't solve all of those issues. And then, of course, it's, making sure that you can share that data to all of the downstream systems that need that information. And a spreadsheet isn't that easy way to do it. That's just where I've seen that point. There is a tipping point that you cannot take it any further. I don't know what
And
you
then
think, Chris.
this is exactly what's happening. And once you have to take it out of the ERP, someone has to do something. Then it goes into a spreadsheet. You have to make a report or an offer based on this information. It all takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes 3-4 weeks even to get all this information together to be able to do the offer. Whereas the competition, who
I mean,
does work in a PIM solution, is able to do this in 3 minutes. And that's where that's also the tipping point. Okay, here we lose actually our customer, or actually we are transferring our customer to our competitor because we cannot offer in time. That's something which we see as well.
I mean, what I probably would say is that most B2B firms don't actually have a product data problem. They have a product data denial problem. They're denying the fact that they have an issue. They feel the pain. They know that, but because the ERP is so central, nobody wants to put their hand up and say it's no longer fit for purpose. So sometimes people will just keep compensating with manual processes and workarounds. But as you said, what's the tipping point? It could be a new channel, it could be a portal launch, it could be marketing onboarding, it could be scale. It could be so many different things. It's normally an accumulation. It's, one thing will start and then they'll try and fix it and it just keeps going. But normally there's something that will trigger it. Maybe they've acquired another company, or they want to bring in a whole new catalog in, or is it, as you said, about things like more configurable products? If you're doing a CPQ, that's when you'll realize that something gives and you've got to make changes.
Or
And
even
then,
something as
yeah,
simple as I need a product sheet now.
yes,
It takes ages to get this out of your ERP, because you have to go to, again, spreadsheet and deliver it somewhere and blah blah blah, things like that. Whereas within a PIM, you can do this instantly, things like that. And you see the denial of having a problem, data problem, is very obvious. But it also has to do with the culture within the organization, because the whole organization is built around this ERP. So it takes a lot of thought and a lot of thinking to change this for an organization. You need some really strong people within the organization saying, okay, we are going to have a shift in the way we are working. And then it takes, well, quite some time to realize this, but you have to start small also with this, but it takes time.
Yeah, I would say, just to add another sort of reason to start using PIM is the fact that you're migrating your ERP or consolidating, right? So it is in a way kind of obvious, but sometimes your ERP is just end of life, right? We've seen that happen quite a few times. Still, not everyone is up to date with their ERP all the time. I think is anyone ever, but in any case, these things go end of life, and then they need to transition to a new solution architecture. And at that stage, I mean, can just take out the product data complexity and combine all the spreadsheets and bolt it on, plug in workflows and processes that you have, well, coped with, designed around the ERP, and migrate that to a dedicated solution as you are upgrading the ERP. And I think in a similar fashion, when you're doing, I would say, consolidation across different business units or different acquisitions, and you're migrating them all to one single ERP landscape, well, maybe even a single IT landscape, it also makes sense to take away all that product data complexity, streamline that in a new data foundation in a single shared PIM solution. So I just wanted to throw those two in as well. Now, one of the things that we see is, okay, so you are switching to a dedicated PIM, right? Are there any specific differences you would see between a more B2B focused PIM and a more B2C focused PIM? Like, what are the key differences between the two? Are there any differences between a B2B PIM and a B2C PIM?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think it's with a B2C, it's much more around how do I present my product in the best way? How can I make it look beautiful? But with the B2B, it's far more around how do I represent it accurately enough that someone can confidently buy it, configure it, install it, maintain, or replace it. Much more complexity. And I think with B2C, it's around persuasion and brand expression. But B2B, it's much more often about technical depth, product relationships, compatibility, classification, variance, documentation, and on a lot of the cases, precision. So whilst it may look like it's the same, it absolutely isn't. And I think it's the complexity of a B2B data model cannot be underestimated. I think that is the major difference. I think it's with a B2B, the product data model, it does tend to be much harder to pull together. We've got, as we've said, configurable products, parent-child structures, spare parts, accessories, replacement, regional compliance, all of these different things that we've already talked about. But it's being able to do that by not just by saying, let's add some more fields, which I would say used to be the response. And maybe that's how you would do it with a B2C. But I think it's a nuanced difference between the two. That's just my opinion. I don't know what you think, Chris.
Yeah, it's about relations between attributes, between groups of data. It's all this kind of relationships which makes it more difficult to construct. It's also in the mind of people more difficult to accomplish, because they are used to add another field. Okay, country of use, and they fill in this. Whereas when you build it as a relationship, you're much more flexible for future. So, but on the other hand, it's the way of thinking is different. So that's in the process of transferring this data to a B2B PIM. That's the most difficult part, to get people in this mindset of thinking. And for me, that's the most important thing is relationships between objects.
I mean, I used to get asked all the time, and you probably do as well, is which PIM is best. But that's not the right question, is it? It's the right question is best for what type of complexity? Because what you see is B2B companies buying marketing-centric PIMs and then trying to force engineering grade data into them. And that's not the right thing. You know, yes, of course, they may look pretty, maybe if they've been targeted at the B2C audience, but they're not designed for that kind of level of complexity. And I think the things that you're looking for in a B2B a capable PIM are the things like the complex hierarchy and variant structures, the things like attribute inheritance and overrides. I mean, inheritance is so important to be able to save time and make sure that things happen. One of the really important things, of course, is units and conversions and technical specs and all of these different things. And we've talked about relationships, and you've said it over and over again, really important. But we haven't got into things like standards like ETIM and BMECAT. That is not something that you would traditionally find in a B2C PIM. And then we are talking about, and we've mentioned CPQ, the configurable parts, but also I would say in a lot of cases the B2C PIM isn't necessarily as tightly integrated to an ERP as perhaps a B2B one needs to be. And of course, the other thing that we do see a lot of is the need for portals, the need to be able to share that information, or for people to be able to come in and download the information about your products. I think it's the reality of what you may think works in a B2C PIM doesn't necessarily transfer into a B2B. And the catalogue tends to be really messy, and being able to set that up you need to have the right backbone to make sure that it can handle the complexity of that. It's things like the model, being able to have depth and being able to have, those relationships. Some PIMs only can model at one level, can't understand variance. So I think when you're looking, you need to make sure that the tool has been designed to cover all of those different use cases.
And you mentioned catalog, so there is also the physical catalog. Your data needs to be top notch and good structured. Then it's able to produce a catalog, semi or automated. If it's not, it's a pain in the because it's really it's not doable. There are so many manual work to be done, and what we often see is that there's a full FTE working on the catalog, which has to be produced every 2 years, and that's not acceptable, and it's not needed. It can be done differently.
No, but I think, come to think of it, the complexity in the B2B space is quite a lot higher than in the B2C space, when you have to really straddle both the sort of B2C experience, especially if you're going into direct to consumer, but your retailers are asking for more B2C information. But you also have a B2B customer, which has more requirements when it comes to the attributes that they want to, the depth of the attributes, as you mentioned, Helen, that they come to expect. And then from a channel perspective, you have all these different channels and standards that you need to map your data to as well. It is as the consumer or the retailer expects the data to come in as the standard requires. And I think if we just dive a little bit deeper on that, so Helen, you already mentioned ETIM. There's BMECAT, there's the GS1 data standard. Can we quickly introduce these concepts for people that are unfamiliar?
They don't sound very exciting, do they? But they are really important because they actually have been designed to reduce friction, make it easy to share that product data across different channels and so on. I think the important thing with understanding, ETIM itself is to help classify products consistently and define standard attributes, especially in technical sectors. That's really where ETIM is. BMECAT is a structured way to exchange catalog data between suppliers and buyers. And GS1 is obviously a standard for making sure that you're sharing that information, and it's different in different regions and for different products and so on. But I think the real value of it is it's not that they're theoretical, it's to be operationally efficient, because your data will be aligned to recognized standards. Every new channel, partner, or marketplace will become easier for you to support because you've already put it into like a standard framework, which makes it much easier to transport that across. So you're not starting from scratch each time. And I know it's not the most exciting topic, but having those standards really helps people make sure that they've got the right data. And if you've got that framework in place, whether it is ETIM, BME, CAT, GS1, you can grow and expand much quicker and faster because you've got that foundational layer of the attributes that you need to be able to share to all of those channels. So whilst everyone goes boring, it's actually a really good starting point to ensure.
Yeah, I mean, boring. Sometimes boring is good, right? So slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. And boring is stable and good, and can help streamline those transactions and those data interchanges. Even in a place where everything is AI and people claim that you can map everything with AI. Maybe that's something for at the end of this conversation. But no, it is good to know where we are, and that these data structures need to be maintained, right? So you need to have a solution that maintains these data structures, these product data models for you, or that does the mapping for you, or that makes the mapping easier. And artificial intelligence does help in this regard. And you need,
It
but it needs to be.
does, but does it understand the nuances of those particular frameworks and so on? And I know that you might think, oh, do I need to worry about that? Does it really matter? When people have said that to me, oh, do we really need to worry about ETIM right now? I think that people are actually saying, we know we should, but we are hoping we can delay it because we think, oh God, it's going to take so much work. But what I would say, the reality is the longer that you wait, the more expensive it will become to retrofit. Or once your data model and your processes and your integrations are already embedded, introducing standards much later becomes much harder. So I think if you know that you're going to, even if you don't need them right now, but potentially you need some of those standards maybe next year, or you're thinking about them, you need to make sure that you choose a solution that can support them, because you don't really want to then have to go, oh no, I've picked the wrong one and I'm going to have to unpick the PIM that I've chosen if it's something that's important to you. So yes, it's boring, but it does make you more structured and focused on the information that you need.
What I often see also is that they have this big corporate PIM solution, which has, of course, a lot of flexibility, but not specifically the ETIM or GS1 maintenance on the model side. That they have another PIM which is very focused on this. It's mostly a smaller PIM, which is really not suited for the big companies, but specifically for this area. They maintain the model, they maintain the ETL part of it. So they're very useful and taking a lot of effort out of the company, and they put this PIM on top of the other PIM. So it's all about the architecture. What do you want to achieve, and how can we do this in the most efficient, time efficient way?
I would also, I'm going to have to counter that by saying the best PIMs don't treat the standard as bolt-on. They're already modeled inside them. So I think if you were at that point of using something, that you need to make sure that if you've got that requirement, I know it's not for everybody, but if you can choose a PIM that models that natively, that's already got those standards built in, you can work with them inside their everyday data management, and then you don't have to keep mapping and so on. So I think if you are at that point and you're evaluating, you want to make sure that you want to ask those questions. Do you support ETIM? Or if you want to ask that, but really you want to dive in deeper and say, how do you support the data model and workflows? It's not just the standard, it's how can you share that information and make sure that that you can do that. But we know that things like ETIM and BMA CAT are quite well known, maybe here in Europe, but there's something that we know about, but in other parts of the world they're a little bit patchy. So if you're looking at a global initiative, you might have some people in other parts of the world scratching their head going, I don't understand what you're talking about. So that's another thing to be aware of. If it's a global implementation, maybe other areas are not so excited or interested in some of those standards, and again, it's a tricky area to navigate.
Yeah, and choosing a PIM from the first place, you can say, okay, these are my requirements, but a lot of companies, they have a PIM in place, and
Yeah.
they're not going to change the PIM, but they have these requirements. So then you have another decision to make, and I think in those cases it can be valuable to put a PIM on a PIM in this situation.
Now, I mean, Helen already mentioned it, but what we often see in B2B environments is also the importance of price lines and pricing, right? And um, Helen mentioned CPQ, so configure price quote engines. And what I would like to maybe touch on is how these three different three-letter words, so PIM, product information management, CPQ, configure price quote engines, and the enterprise resource planning tool, the ERP. Wow, I almost forgot. Um, how they interact and how they intersect. And I mean, we always tell clients like, don't manage your pricing in PIM. So let's start there with maybe a quick overview of what these tools and these different three-letter combinations mean, and also how they interact.
I think PIM is actually it's the content layer, and descriptions, specs, images, documents, etc., etc. Whereas the ERP is the transaction layer. So it's more the information about orders, inventory, finance, things like that. And CPQ is more a logical layer. They have to interact with each other. And when we see traditionally, especially in brands and manufacturers, ERP was the first entry point for a product. Next came a PIM solution where you had to add additional information because the ERP couldn't handle this specific information within the ERP. You can use additional attributes, but there is a limit on this. Um, the next move was that we had to change the order of the flow of product creation. So it started within the PIM, actually in the PLM before the PIM, but it started within the PIM, then moved to the ERP and other solutions. So there is a big shift in how to keep track on and how to organize your product creation. CPU needs the information from PIM, but also from ERP to create maybe new products based on components which are defined within PIM and ERP. So there needs to be an ID, a connecting key to join all this information together. And then about pricing, I think traditionally ERP is the place for pricing. Uh, what I see more and more is there will be an additional, which is not mentioned here, pricing engine, especially in B2B where you have different price lines and different agreements with your customers. Also, it can be done in an ERP, but most ERPs don't handle this very nice. So what you see is there will be a specific pricing engine. So they all have to work together. And that's the connecting things, the integration layer, which becomes very important here to orchestrate all this information. So that's the basic setup, and it can be a little bit different for each company, but basically this how they work together.
Yeah, yeah. And how do we see that in practice? So I the theory is nice,
It is.
but
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think the biggest, everything should connect. Absolutely, it all should integrate. But it's the problem really starts when every system tries to be the master. And I think that is the bit that causes the most problems. When they're talking about integration pain, that's like one part, but it's normally governance, as in we know the systems can connect and as they should, and they can share data, but who owns what? Who owns that truth? And where does the ownership start and stop? So I think that for me is the difficult part. It's normally political, of course, because everybody agrees that the integration matters, but nobody will agree on who owns what. And I think absolutely, we know that each of those solutions and those systems they are part of the process, but it's where does that, where does it all start and so on. And it's like, how do you decide who is going to be the authority source for the product data? And if that's not settled on early, you're going to have all of the things that we know you're going to get, the duplicates, the problems, the synchronization not working, and endless reconciliation between all the different tools. So I think, I totally agree, there's all those different tools and they should all connect, but it still comes back to my favorite, and we always come back to it, the governance part of it all, as who's responsible for what. And I think that is one of the critical things with all of these different tools. We know that they are embedded in pretty much every organization, but again, it's around who owns that data and who's going to look after it and move that across, and how do you integrate it, and does it need to go bi-directionally, and all of those kind of different things. And then that becomes yet again another area for things to go wrong.
First of all, who owns the data means, in my opinion, within the business, who owns the data as a person or as a role, who owns the data. Next step is, where is this data organized within the technical environment, and what's the system of record? Is it PIM? Is it ERP? Is it another system? That's also possible. Because when you export things from ERP and transform it in an Excel, import it to PIM and export it again to CPQ, that's not integration. That's a part-time job, maybe full-time job even.
I mean, good integration does feel really boring, doesn't it? But that's in the best possible way. It feels boring, but you need to have that data flowing predictably. You need to know who's responsible for it, and you need to make sure that if you have any changes, that they're done in a controlled manner. But we all know out in the real world, we often encounter a patchwork of where different teams have compensated for missing capability over time. So you'll have a little pocket where they've got their own, I'm going to say, departmental PIM or their own processes there. But it's one of those things that if you don't get that right, we can talk for ages about how wonderful a PIM is. If it's not integrated properly, or if it's not owning the right parts of the data, it's not going to work again. So I think it's really thinking about making sure that you don't have bad integration where everybody's firefighting and nobody can make those decisions. And it's not normally the tools, by the way, it's the ownership. So I think that's really important when we're looking at this complexity of different tools being part of, particularly in B2B, those, because they are different from a B2C environment. So I think really important to talk about that up front.
Yeah. And it's ownership of the data, but also very important, ownership of the architecture. And when that's not in place, then everything falls apart.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, complexity being managed by people still, and that means governance and agreements are important. And we see patchwork solutions where we still have people manually sending spreadsheets or downloads or whatever from tool to tool. And I would say, oh, it's maybe a great indication that you need to review that process, because it just saves so much time when you have this running smoothly. And that makes it a great segue to the thing I wanted to discuss next, which is sort of the unique, I would say, B2B experience is the self-service portal, right? So I think one of the key differences between B2B and B2C is also the technical complexity, but also the different levels or different use cases for product information, where maybe a consumer would be happy with just 10 attributes, and generally the 95% of the B2C users, or maybe 99%, of the use cases are covered by just that specific set of 10 attributes. Where for B2B, the how you apply a certain product, or how you apply or configure a certain product, changes the way, and changes the attributes, or the relevancy of attributes So you need to have, well, maybe even a very simple one. You have different regulations per market. So yes, you can share all the regulatory documentation with everyone, or you make it in such a way, you serve that information in such a way that in France you only get to see, or you can at least configure it in such a way that you only get to see the documents that are relevant for your target market or for your specific use case. Maybe how do you guys see those use cases differ from a B2B to a B2C user?
I think the most important thing is that you have to be very accurate in how you set up your data model, um, because it's not just humans grabbing this data, but it's also systems using this data. So you need to really know what your end users, or what the users of your environment, of your products need on the data. You have to go back to a very granular level of storing this data, so you can work with this data and deliver this data to your customer A in a certain way. Customer B does want it in another way, but you can construct this data in a way as you want, because you have captured this on the most granular level. I think that's one of the things which is makes life in the end more easy. In the beginning, it's a hassle, because you think, oh, do I need to split this attribute in two attributes? Because, but in the end, it will help you a lot.
I totally agree. I think you have to spend more time thinking about the configuration of the data model, thinking about, can you automate some of that? I mean, for example, are there things where you can build rules around making sure that you're displaying the right information based on something like the market or whatever that is? I think it's the need to be able to have that data model set up in the right way to make sure that you're going to be successful. And I would always advise, if you're looking at this, is to start with one particular set of products and really think about, how do they work together? What information do I need to display? And so on. The more time that you invest in getting the data model right, making sure that you have the right attributes, that you've understood the markets that you're selling to, the different variants and so on, the more successful you're going to be. And I think that is the difference between a B2C data model and a B2B one, is that we keep coming back to the complexity, but the more time that you spend on getting that right, the better it's going to be down the line. So I think that's the bit that's probably underestimated, is the difference between B2C and B2B, is that data model complexity, and the need to, if you can, build in rules and automation. And we could even say AI was something that you could do here. Even if you were thinking about when you're bringing information in from the ERP, for example, we all know that sometimes the product descriptions in an ERP, not exactly the best, because they've been concatenated. But if there's some logic in the way that you've named that product, is there something that you could use with an AI or some kind of agent to help you unpick that description? Does it contain the size? Does it contain a color? And we know sometimes that it does. Can you do that to then populate other fields and so on, so when you're pulling that through, and help you classify that product as well? So I think, are the things that you can do to make it less stressful when you're implementing a whole new PIM or building a data model. But it is a different approach perhaps to B2C, and I think that sometimes is underestimated when people are thinking, it's going to take me a couple of weeks. Gosh, I wish it could, but it won't, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a much more complicated and complex world. Maybe complex is the right word.
Yes,
Word there.
complex. Yes.
Complex. Not chaotic, but definitely complex, where there's so many layers and so many interactions between different solutions and systems and stakeholders in that system, that it is more difficult to set up. Right? It's not in a way, the the retailer, let's put it that way, the B2C retailer, is at the end of a value chain and gets data that they need to translate, and there's still a lot of lot you can do and improve on the data that they get and the processes that they have. But the flow is pretty straightforward. You don't get any interaction. It's just one way in that sense. I think in the B2B space, for manufacturers or for wholesalers, you get much more interactions in multiple ways and back and forth. Like adding a CPQ engine adds so much more complexity to all of the 3 different systems involved. Like you need to be able to transact on a configured product. Like how are you going to even do that? And of course, before that, you need to be able to configure a product based on specific inputs. How are you going to get those inputs into the configuration engine? So there's so much more complexity that even we, coming maybe more from a B2C world, sometimes underestimate in a B2B space. Maybe closing it off as we are coming up for time. Like if you're in this space and you need to have a B2B PIM, you are a product data leader in this space, a CTO, CIO, CMO. What should you do next if you want to move forward with your product data and bring that to the next level?
I think have an audit actually where your product data actually lives at this moment, because from our experience we know that it's not obvious, it's not clear every time. So what and start small, not with the whole catalog, but just with a small amount of products. Where does it live in your ERP? What spreadsheets are there in the organization? Who is doing what? This kind of information, which is not always clear, because when I ask a manager, how do you do this? Okay, we're doing this. And when there are other people around the table, yeah, but I do this. And when I don't do this, then it won't happen. And so there's a lot of hidden information within the company, and try to get this for a small amount of product. And then it becomes more obvious what the complexity is also within the company. And define then who owns the data. That's also a challenge, because
Absolutely.
not everybody agrees with the one manager saying, oh, it's me, or it's him, or it's everybody, and everybody is nobody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just back to your first point. I think it's that you can't fix your product data until you stop pretending that it lives in one place, because people will say, oh, no, we haven't got it scattered everywhere. You've got to be really open and honest and realize that you're pulling it in from multiple areas. And I think if you are at that beginning journey, if you are in that position of looking for a PIM for B2B, you've got to make sure that you have B2B specific criteria for evaluating the product that you want. Make sure that it does support product complexity, it does support standards, documentation, relationships, variant handling. And we haven't had a chance to talk about things like self-service portals, but that is becoming really important for people to be able to, you get your data ready, and then somebody can come in and pull that down, and you giving them that ability to do that rather than sending out spreadsheets and so on. So I think it's making sure that you are looking for the right things, and it does integrate with your ERP and CPQ if you need it to do so. So I think it's making sure that you are not focusing maybe on the features exactly, but making sure that the platform can actually model the real world complexity of your catalog. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, agreed. I'm glad that we ended with data first. Get your data audited and in place. Get the governance structures and processes in place. Review them, and then finally, of course, find the right solution that supports you today or tomorrow, but also in 5 years, because many of these projects start with a very small, simple piece of that product data puzzle, and they then expand to cover the whole complexity that B2B commerce actually is. I want to wrap up here. Thanks a lot for your time today. Thanks a lot to the audience for joining us. If people want to learn more about Helen or Syndigo, please do reach out to her on LinkedIn or go to syndigo.com And if you want to know more about Chris and me and PIMVendors.com, well, it's in the name, visit us on our website, follow us on your favorite podcast platform, as there will be more episodes coming up, maybe around self-service portals as well, as I think we can dive in much deeper there. But also just follow us on our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Chris directly. See you in another webinar or episode, and hope to see you then. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.